The kind of platforms that scaled my side of the industry. You've not moved to complete interconnection. You've not moved to data architectures that are open. You've not moved to the cloud. And I'm ignoring the machine learning, which is relatively new.
Sure.
But over and over again, my view of the sum of the IT industry is that it's conservative beyond where it should be. So let me say again, you care about security, the cloud is going to be more secure than your data architecture. You're worried about your medical data being stolen by the bad guys and sold, right? A very legitimate worry. It's going to be safer in a cloud-based provider. It's just true.
So that's a risk which is reduced by where the data is held and where the processing occurs. There's another component in healthcare, and this starts to get to that predictive modeling that you mentioned, which is the risk or the liability, if you would. How do we start to think about the balance? Because today we take so much of the information that comes from systems, we bring it out of clinical decision support. We need that validation from the physician or the clinician. It begins to start to shift the risk, if you would. How does that start to play?
So I want to be clear that for the discussions of AI and machine learning, the decision maker should not be the computer because it makes mistakes. And one of the problems we have with respect to AI right now is that not only do they make a small percentage, but nevertheless a small percentage of errors, but we as an industry cannot explain those errors. So, you know, my standard joke on this goes something like, we have a self-driving car that's been trained by some startup and they trained it by driving along. And I'm driving and I don't know if you all do this in Nevada, but in California there's this thing called the California rolling stop. We don't quite stop the car. So the car does that and the policeman pulls me over and the policeman says, "Why did you do the rolling stop?" And I say to the policeman, I wasn't driving, officer. And he looks at me and says, "Well, who was?" And the car says, "I was, officer." And so the officer says to the car, "Why did you do the California rolling stop?" And the car says, "I don't know." Truthfully. Because it was trained, and it's one of the things it learned. Now there are, again, many research projects working on this issue, which have technical names, to make sure that we can actually explain the behavior of these networks and so forth. So for things that are life critical, I want a human in the loop.
Right.
I want a nurse and a doctor, a real expert. And I want them to use computers as data sources, along with their good judgment and colleagues and so forth. And I want them to be in charge. In my vision, the doctor and the nurse, the clinicians, are more important. And if you believe anything close to what I said about the 2-to-1 ratio, we should be able to get a significant proportion of improvement of productivity out of our existing doctors. And by the way, in case you haven't noticed, there's a doctor shortage. Plus, we're all living older, which is a good thing, right? So the doctor shortage is not going to get better, right?
It's not going to get
And I'm not in favor of having life extension be shortened, right? So let's try to deal with the reality. We have a lot of older people, their needs are going to be higher. We need to help automate and make these clinicians even more productive. And we can do it, and they'll be happier as a result.
So we have a shift coming. We can maintain the risk. We're going to have the human intervention of it, which is still a critical part of the formula. We talked a little bit in the opening, and you talked about the 6 points, about the geographic displacement that we have. This seems like a tremendous step forward in being able to do diagnostics at great distance and really helping understand where we need to be in the delivery of care.
So I'm familiar with 2 examples. Cleveland Clinic has done this thing called the tele-ICU, very successful. Again, their extreme knowledge applied to that. Mayo has done a tele-neonatology unit, which I'm familiar with. Again, incredible results, right, because they have that concentration of knowledge. So my question is, and these are expensive to set up, so my question is, how do we scale that? It's the scale question, and you mentioned this in your opening arguments. And I think the answer is with an increased level of automation. In other words, having a doctor manage even more automated systems and watching for errors, watching for things, and signing off on final judgments, we can have doctors be even more productive. And again, especially when you think about the developing world. I was in Myanmar. It's a beautiful country. And I was talking to the guide, and I said, well, tell me about the healthcare system in your country. They had just come out of the military junta, and they said, well, it was like a strange question. She spoke English. And, well, okay, so I tried a different question. What happens when you go to the doctor? And she said, well, we don't have a doctor. And I said, well, we're in a rural area. Well, where would you find a doctor? Well, we could go to the city, but we don't have the money to go. Right? That's why I work here. And I said, well, what happens when people get, really sick? And she said, well, they die. And it's one of those really humbling statements. We take for granted in our developed world that the access, even if you're complaining about it, it's long waits and so forth, that it exists. Okay, the majority of humans, right, our fellow brethren, men and women of our same kind, don't have access to any health care. I can think of no higher calling in figuring out a way to take the pieces that I'm describing, which needs to be done by some very clever doctors, right, and figure out how to scale that not to 10 people, as in these tele-examples, but in 500 people and 1,000 people, right? And we have this sort of core issue around cost. Now, we can debate whether cost in aggregate is going to go up, but we know that automation of this kind reduces the cost of specific treatments and has all sorts of positive benefits.
Sure. Our clock is running, both figuratively and literally. But as we look up and we see the silver tsunami coming, when we talk about the gaps that we have, what do we have to do to accelerate? Because the fear that many have is literally in the next 5 to 10 years, we're going to hit a crisis we may not actually appreciate. We're talking about that tomorrow. So how are we going to shorten this timeline? Because right now, our adoption of new technology, it worries me if we're really on a 5 to 10 year scale.
I think, by the way, this is why you took the job, to work on this problem. We were talking about this.
It's true.
I would say to all of you that, first place, demographics are reality, right? So the demographics of our future is understood. And what you said is just true. You can't deny it. It's going to happen, right? So what are we going to do about it, right? So in the American way, we're going to use innovation. We're going to talk about it a lot, and we're going to ultimately have free market solutions that will get us there. That's how we work as a country,
right.
And it's a good way to do it. I can think of no better way to address both revenue concerns as well as healthcare concerns as to the combination of moving to cloud and then using machine learning tools of the kind that I've described, right, to address this. In order to move to the cloud, you also have to get your EHR vendors and all your other data vendors to use Fire HL7 version 2 interfaces, along with ICOM and so forth. As I mentioned earlier, that work is underway inside your institutions. I think you basically need to hire more engineers.
There you go.
Right? Sorry to say, but a small number of engineers who could take what I just outlined and get it integrated will give you so much economic value in terms of cost, profits, expense coverage, the ability to hire additional doctors, and to fund the kinds of things that we really want to do.
Well, in our closing minute, my question to you really is, what would be your message to the healthcare community?
Well, I think you're late to my world. You're ahead in many areas, but you're late to the kind of stuff I'm talking about. And you're late there for many, many good historical reasons, but it's 2018, right? It's time to move forward. And the moving forward is internet. I gave you the formula: data, cloud, network, reinforcement learning, machine learning, integrated solutions, big data stores. The power of big data, the ability to get these insights, is unimaginable when you actually see it. When you say, oh my God, another stupid example. So we think we have the best engineers in the world. And every company does, but we're sure we're right. So we have these data centers, and our data centers are massive. And our data centers are incredibly important to us, and they use a lot of energy. So the DeepMind group did a program where they looked at data center usage. This is literally power, fans, cycling, and so forth. And using these algorithms beat the best human designers by 15% in our data centers. I mean, 15% is more than the profitability of most companies. Imagine that solution, separate topic, applied to power generation, gas generation, oil generation, things which need to be efficient. Imagine that 15% applied to the provision of healthcare using the same algorithm.
Amazing.
That number is higher than the profitability of almost every healthcare institution I know of. That's how powerful this stuff is.
Fantastic. Eric, I did wish we had more time, but
No, thank you all,
so
and
much.
good luck. Thank you all. That's all.